Hi, everybody. So the the conversation piece for today is a question that a good friend of mine sent to me, a friend and colleague by the name of Daniel Kilov, who's a, a brilliant philosopher and mnemonist in his own right. So I'll link his stuff below this video. And he asked me the following question, or he raised the following tension. He says to me, a lot of your philosophical work is animated by a concern with how to live well. By contrast, your attitude towards meditation is that it shouldn't be thought of as a tool to help one live well, but as a tool for philosophical investigation. It seems like there is an interesting tension there. Additionally, these two attitudes are the opposite of those held by the general population. Most people think that meditation is useful in some immediate sense and that philosophy is an abstract subject disconnected from everyday concerns. It's an interesting tension. Can it be resolved? I think it can, but I also want to just note that some of the best insights in life come from holding things gently but firmly in tension. And so for me, the tension is real, but one of the ways I've tried to resolve it is by living my life in a certain way. But on a conceptual level, we'll say, I think that point about holding tension is from Carl Jung. And I think there's something to that. But I also want to address the underlying conceptual issues. So I'm going to talk mostly about meditation. But, I think Daniel is correct that for a lot of people, philosophy is sort of abstract, disconnected, and not really anchored in the everyday. And I just don't think that's true. And I'll say a bit about why nearer to the end, but I'll be briefer about that. So this is what I'm about to say is sort of an extension of a conversation I have with my colleague, friend, and mentor, Evan Thompson, and in a previous video called Meditation and Philosophy. And the first thing I want to do is distinguish between two important senses of the word meditation, or two, levels, say, at which the cultivation of contemplative practice happens. One is a hyper commodified self-help tool that has really come to flourish in late stage capitalism. And the other is a very immersive and quite profound way of life. And by the first definition, meditation is certainly a tool. It is certainly a tool. It is something that we use to get what we want, a little more calmness, a little more, room to breathe in a busy life. But one of the worries I have about living in late stage capitalism is the way in which it warps our sense of value. And it warps our sense of value by commodifying everything and turning all goods into instrumental goods. And, living well is a good goal to have, and anything that leads us towards living well is, worthy. So I think there are ways to use instrumental goods towards good ends. But when we think of meditation as a kind of tool, it becomes sort of a tool in our toolkit for life. And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that, but the way that these techniques are often employed in modern psychology and in modern culture, really more widely, is in a way that I find can lead to what's sometimes called a sort of spiritual materialism. By the second definition, and I'll say more about spiritual materialism as I go, but by the second definition, when we think about meditation as a way of life, is something that's a bit more global and deep and immersive in its practice, we get into some pretty deep territory, and I think that both forms of practice, actually, right, the mindfulness app kind of practices and the more immersive, say, retreat oriented kinds of practices, monastic levels of discipline, both can help us lead a good life. I think that they can be helpful, but there are serious worries embedded in each, and because each one of these forms of meditation practice, which I take to be relatively exhaustive, actually, I could nuance that more, but because there are such serious pitfalls in each, I've become far less of a proselytizer about meditation in my as I've grown, and I worry about it sometimes because in my own life, meditation has probably caused as many problems as it's helped me to solve. So I'm going to take each in turn. For the first definition, the definition of meditation as a tool, as a kind of self-help tool, as something that you sort of use when and as you like to help yourself get to certain places or get certain things. When we practice in this way, I think we are doing relatively superficial work, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. Working with the surface level of the mind is good for you. But the worry here is that what we might actually be up to is simply pacifying ourselves against oppressive structures of late stage capitalism. And this criticism is not my own. This is something that's been raised by a number of people. And so in that sense, we might be guilty of a certain kind of spiritual materialism, that we are engaged in a practice that reifies a certain image of ourselves that we like to project onto others in the service of, feeding a need to be seen as a certain way by others. And this is dangerous. This actually inflates the sense of self rather than deflates it, which is, at least in Buddhist philosophy, one of the things we're trying to do is to be, live a somewhat selfless existence. For the second, for those people who go a bit beyond the surface level and start to really devote themselves to practice, and one of the interesting things about the 20th century is that there are ample opportunities for householders, lay people, to practice contemplative techniques that are very rigorous and really cut through appearances at the surface level of one's own personal psychology and put us into territory and layers of consciousness that we would otherwise not have access to. But the thing about this level of practice is that the transformations of mind and value that come with more serious practice and prolonged cultivation of these altered states of consciousness and character is that it can actually do serious damage to your life if you're not careful, especially if you're not actually a monastic. There are very real reasons why yogis from various contemplative traditions abandon their possessions and wander homeless or sequester themselves in monasteries. And one of the reasons they do this is not just to escape from the hustle bustle of everyday life, but to give themselves the space that is required to handle the kinds of experiences that come up when you start blasting through the doors of your subconscious with a very refined level of bodily self-awareness. One of the things about contemplative traditions is that they're really interested in what we might loosely call the ultimate truth of things. And so and these techniques are designed to bring you to thresholds of experience that allow you to experience the ultimate truth as it's understood by these various traditions. But the ultimate truth of reality for, say, Buddhism, which is what I am familiar with both as a scholar and as a practitioner, is that everything is impermanent. And deep awareness of impermanence within the pre-reflective embodied stream of consciousness can really be a profoundly liberating experience. But we are not just truth-seeking creatures. We are meaning-creating creatures as well. And these contemplative traditions are actually, in a lot of cases, not super good with the meaning construction part of it. That's what therapy's for, to figure out the narrative, to integrate the experiences into the story of your life. And one of the things that can happen to you when you go really deep into meditation is that the truth of things can be so stark and intense that you lose track of the meaning. And this can then also be coupled with profound alteration in the senses and in our emotions. So there are powerful forms of sensory amplification that happen in serious meditation, emotional upheaval that the deep work perpetuates. It can be downright dissociative. And when we start trying to reprogram our instinctual responses to things like pleasure and pain, and to really drill into our subconscious motivations, learning to integrate the insights that come from that level of work can take years. It did in my case. I went through some very serious cases of sensory amplification and emotional upheaval that have taken me probably 5 to 10 years of serious work on my own, just to really get back to a place of being okay. And that's a lot of work, and the rewards are wonderful, but the work is arduous and often terrifying. Because in Buddhism, at least, when we try to overcome dukkha in a serious way, this involves plumbing the depths of the mind, and that can take us into territory that modern psychology is often in the business of pathologizing, and with good reason. And so finding oneself in that kind of territory without a guide or proper sense of how to get out or get through can do serious damage to one's life. And this raises another point, that the more superficial level of practicing meditation and these deeper levels, they aren't super distinct. Sometimes you can blast through to very deep territory before you're ready. And so one of the reasons I've tried to back off from thinking of meditation as a tool that we use to live a good life is because meditation for me isn't a tool that I use to live a good life. It's just the backbone of my life. And I will say that I think it has improved my life, but life is pervaded with dukkha, according to Buddhists. And when you see that in real time and with the depth and precision of mind that Buddhist contemplative practice at least offers you, without a lot of strength and courage, it can really bowl you over. And so I think the idea that meditation is just a good thing is not really accurate, because meditation properly, practice deeply, I won't say properly, I don't want to be too problematically normative here, but practice deeply takes us into some fundamental terrain that is neither good nor bad. It is just true. But the truth hurts. And learning to face the pain of finitude and impermanence, and learning to take responsibility for your own freedom by cultivating it, can be lonely. It can be scary. Freedom will liberate you, but it's also a burden at times, which is why, and here I'm going to flip back to philosophy, that the discipline of reason is also very important for helping us live well, because it keeps us humble, it keeps us open, it keeps us evidence sensitive, in a word, reason responsive. And when we practice meditation deeply, and even when we do philosophy seriously, there's a worry that I have that so often that we just become self-encased. We really just bake in our own presuppositions to our perceptions of the world and of our feelings in our bodies. And philosophy can help make sure you're not just reifying your own presuppositions. Philosophy has its own worries like that, right? But I think what often passes for rationality and reason responsiveness, or the giving of reasons, is often just a kind of post facto rationalization of a fairly automatic and heedless reactive attitude to some kind of affective state. And this makes it the case that we are just often in the business of talking ourselves into emotionally self-encasing and self-perpetuating feedback loops. I tell myself a story about the meaning of my life, which makes me feel a certain way, and I feel a certain way, which motivates me to keep telling the same story. And I just self-encase. I think both meditation and philosophy can help us with this by, giving us precision and clarity and thought and feeling that can keep us curious and humble. And I think that that's a really important contribution of philosophy. So I do reject the views of those who see philosophy as hopelessly abstract and not anchored in everyday life. I think that philosophy is dynamic and plastic enough that it can be both. Philosophy demands of us that we try and supplicate ourselves to reality and to understand our finitude with respect to something infinite. And that's a good thing. So I try to see them as paired and as mutually reinforcing, and that the perspective that I'm constructing is one that is strong enough to withstand the perturbations of life, but hopefully porous enough to be able to take it in and do something meaningful and helpful or service oriented with it. But I can speak here from very deep experience that I think philosophy has helped me live a good life, but it's also alienated me from people who don't like the life of an intellectual. And similarly, meditation has helped me live a good life, but has precipitated levels of psychological upheaval that have been, have taken a tremendous amount of effort to overcome and integrate. And so what benefits meditation can offer a life are numerous, but at a certain level of practice, you're actually opening the door to addressing certain problems that you could probably live in a successful life without having ever really dug into. Not being averse, being averse to pain and enjoying pleasure, for example, are like really good bets for living a successful life as an organism. Buddhist meditation forces you to start to interrogate and get underneath of that relationship and getting into dimensions of embodiment and cognition and emotion where you are taking a more detached and interrogative attitude towards these kinds of past pre-reflective attitudes towards pleasure and pain can really transform your life and give you a lot of freedom and agency that you might not have otherwise had, but it also can really mess with you. And that's why I don't think of meditation so much as a tool, but as a way of life. And that insofar as you're using it as a tool, you might be, not necessarily, but you might be in a feedback loop of spiritual materialism in the service of late-stage capitalist commodification and consumption. And then that's not somewhere any of us need to be. I don't know if I've resolved the tension, but I hope I've at least engaged with it a little bit, and that has been of some help to anyone who might be watching this. So stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.